Hello everyone, and welcome to Uglesoft's Python Keystrokes tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to make a Python file that when you execute it, it will listen for a hotkey, and when that hotkey is pressed, it'll actually type out some characters to whatever application is in the foreground. So we're going to need Python here. I've got the URL available for you, but just to show you what we're going to be getting into, I have my little alice.py file shortcut right here. Alice is just the name of the little bot that I created. I like to anthropomorphize a little, but yeah, I've got a few commands in here that are pretty helpful. We're going to keep it kind of simple today and just do the email footer function. All it does is type out a string of fixed text, and whenever you press the hotkey, it will do that repeatedly every single time. So the email footer that I have is the 0 digit, the character E, and the character F. So when I press all three of those keys at the same time, you're going to see that it types out respectfully, comma, line break, and then my name, Christian Kessler. Now I can do this as many times as I want, and it will keep doing it every single time. You can see that we've got some messages here in the actual terminal that's telling us what happened. The email footer function was activated, and then it was completed each time. So that's what we're going to be building today. So let's close out of all this and get into what we actually need in order to start developing with Python. First thing you're going to need, obviously, is Python on your machine. Python isn't automatically read by most machines, but getting it installed onto your machine is pretty easy. You can head over to python.org/downloads and pick the one that's correct for your operating system. Or if you're on a Windows machine like I am, you can head over to the Microsoft Store and just search for Python. Now, I typically don't like to get things related to development from places like this, these sort of pre-built services like the Microsoft Store, the Google Play Store, but I've used this before. It's a really simple one-click install. It'll add it to your path and everything. And if you're a beginner, then this might be a really good option for you. And honestly, when I don't feel like going through the hassle of installing it manually, which isn't very hard, mind you, I still like to use the Microsoft Store sometimes. So pick your poison. Now, I already have Python on my machine, so I'm not going to go through the process of reinstalling it. If that's a trouble for you, then just stick with the Microsoft Store. It's a one-click. But what I would recommend you download if you don't already have it is Visual Studio Code. So you can go to code.visualstudio.com/download and pick the right one for your operating system. Visual Studio Code is a text editor / IDE that's incredibly powerful, and I recommend it for pretty much everything except for like Java applications. But I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, and there's quite a few settings and built-in features that you just won't have if you're developing in, I don't know, Notepad or something. So again, I already have this installed on my machine, so I'm just going to close out of this and we're going to dive right into it. So I have a Visual Studio Code instance open in my empty directory, just the Python Keystrokes file, where I'm going to be creating the file that I walk you through today. So before we start developing our actual Python file, there is a module we're going to need to install. So we can head up here to the terminal, click New Terminal. This is going to be the same thing as your command line, command prompt in Windows, or whatever a terminal your operating system happens to use, but it's built into Visual Studio Code, which I find really convenient. Now the command we're going to want to use is pip space install space pynput. This is the pinput module, and it's going to have a lot of cool things that we can use, like a hotkey and a keyboard output, but it's already on my machine. It might take your machine a little while to download and install it. It's not that crazy though. I mean, Python is pretty dense and powerful, so it probably won't take you too long. But that's all checked out on my end, so I'm going to go ahead and kill that terminal, get rid of it, and now we can actually create the file and start writing our Python code. So creating that first file, let's just call it keystrokes.py. .py is going to be the Python extension. That'll tell the machine that everything inside is actual Python code and to interpret it as such. If we don't put that extension in properly, then we won't be able to execute the script. So the first thing that we're going to need is from pynput import keyboard. So that's going to import the keyboard class from the pinput module, and then from pinput.keyboard we need to import controller, key. So that's going to import controller and key from the pinput.keyboard class. Not key code. Why would it add that? And then the last thing that we're going to need is import time. Now, time is another module that doesn't have anything to do with pinput, but it's built into Python, so you won't need to install that manually. We're going to add a little print statement just to make sure that we don't have errors going through. So we're going to just do print, parentheses, and then test file. That's all it needs to be. We'll save it. Now, typically we'd have to go out to the terminal and then run Python space, the name of this file, the path of this file. That can be kind of complicated. Visual Studio Code makes it really easy for us. Just click run Python file, and it'll open up a terminal and execute it. So it printed test file and reached the end of the file. That means we're done. So we're going to keep running this as we develop it, just to make sure that we don't have any syntax errors or bugs. I mean, Visual Studio Code likes to tell us when we have syntax errors before we ever execute, but it's still nice to just have, print lines all over the place so you know exactly where the error is at if you can't find it from other means. So it's kind of a hassle to add those later on if necessary. I like to just cover myself as I develop. But the first thing that we're going to have to do, now that we've got those modules installed and our test print lines are all taken care of, we need to define an instance of the controller class. So we're going to do C equals controller parentheses, and C is going to be a virtual version of the keyboard, essentially. So we can use this with dot notation to call functions that will actually send information to the machine keyboard, or simulating the machine keyboard. We're also going to need a function to actually call with the hotkeys that we're about to build. So let's just make a really simple function right here. We're just going to call this sample underscore function, and goodness, this terminal, delete that, sample underscore function, parentheses, and we'll add the semicolon. So all we're going to do here is print function started, or actually function called, and that's it. So that's all that function is going to do. Python's kind of weird. We don't have any curly braces to open or enclose our functions. It's all about indentation. So anything that we have indented like this after the semicolon will be counted as part of the function. And as soon as we go back to all the way to the left, Python knows that that's not part of the function anymore. So now that we've got, a print and a sample function built, let's set up the actual hotkey that will listen for the keyboard input that will call the function. So the way that we're going to do that is with keyboard dot global hotkeys parentheses. Now we got to put some things inside here. Here we are going to use curly braces. We're going to use let's just do 0 plus S plus F. That's just, I like to add the 0 key because otherwise when I type sometimes I'll accidentally call my functions because I tend to type really fast. So like EF, that's email footer function, but if those letters tend to go back to back, and I'll accidentally type out my email function and call it when I don't mean to, which is annoying. So I like to add the 0 key to just prevent that, because you're never going to write 0SF back to back really quickly. So then after we have that little string that defines the characters we're going to be using for our actual hotkey, this silly annoying little pop-up, we have to call the function. So we're just going to say sample function, and that's all it is. Now we're going to do this again, and we're also going to have this be W and P, just to show that you can have multiple hotkeys listening for the same functions, right? So you can have a bunch of different parameters set up that will all execute the same function if you want. You could do that for as many as you really want, and then you can just keep adding to this as you like. So just separate them by a comma, string, semicolon, matching that syntax, and you're good to go. Now VSC is telling us that we have an error, and that's because we haven't told the program what we're going to do with this keyboard global hotkeys. So now we need to type out as h semicolon indent h dot join. And that's going to be it for the entire hotkey program. Now this is really cool because if you do something like a while loop that's listening for certain keyboard inputs, it's going to be executing as much as it possibly can, which will burn out, well, not destroy, but it'll use up 100% of the CPU. This module is super awesome because it lies in wait until that keyboard input is pressed, and then it'll start executing. So it's not going to use up your CPU like crazy in the meantime. I did a few keystroke programs like that in the beginning when I was just getting started, and they were fine, but I had to stop running them as soon as I was done using them. You know, it would like print out numbers 1 through 100 and press enter between each one. And it was good for that, but it would just, you can't leave them running in the background. This program, you can. I can open my little automatic keystrokes function and just leave it up all day and use the keystrokes as I need. So far more convenient that way, and this is the method that I recommend you use. So let's go ahead and save it and test it out and see if it works. So we're going to go up here and click Run Python File. See, we've got our little test file, and you notice that it doesn't go back to the path because it's lying in wait. This script isn't done. It hasn't been released back to the terminal. You know, it's not over yet. So let's head in here, press enter a few times, just get into, actually no, we're not going to type in our file. We're going to make a new file called text.txt, and this is where we're going to just put out random stuff. So what was it, 0sf? Let's try it. So nothing happened here as far as actual text, but function called was sent to the terminal. So that means that our hotkeys are working properly. Now that we've got our hotkeys working properly and we can actually call the functions, we need to flesh out what the function actually does. So let's head back into our little Python file and head over to the sample function. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit more descriptive. We're going to change this from sample function to, let's do email footer. And we'll just change that all the way across. We're also going to change these to E plus F. And we'll also do M plus F. So it's email footer and then mail footer, just because I like to have multiple ways to call the same thing. You don't have to do that, by the way. It's optional, definitely optional. But we're going to go in here and we need to, first of all, make sure that we release the keys that we pressed to actually call the hotkey, and then delete the characters that we just typed by calling the hotkey. So the way we're going to do that is by using the controller that we defined up here, which is the variable c. So we're going to do c dot release, and then we're going to put in 0. We're going to do the same thing for the other keys that we could call, or that we might be using with our keystrokes. So E, M, and F, because these are all the options that we can use for our email footer. We're going to release them all. If they're not pressed, that's fine. You know, if we use the EF version, it will release the M, but the M is already released. Not a problem. What we have to do after that is delete the text that we just put in by typing out the actual hotkey. So we need to use C, press, and then key dot backspace, if I can spell it properly. So that's going to press the backspace key, but then we also need to let it go and press it again. So this is going to press and release the backspace key, and we do that 2 more times because there are 3 characters that we just typed out, and now we have completely cleared out what we put in for the actual hotkey. This is going to be at the very beginning of every single function that I call within my hotkey programs, because I typically use 3 different characters on the keyboard as a hotkey parameter. It's just a good practice so you don't accidentally call them, and it keeps the clearing out of the input pretty simple and straightforward. It's just releasing some keys and then 3 backspaces. I recommend doing the same, but everything after this is what we're actually going to be doing with the hotkey. So now that our function has handled the input that we've given it, let's get some space here, we're going to actually start doing what our function is supposed to do. So we're going to do c.type. Instead of pressing and releasing specific keys to type out a whole character of text, that would take forever. What we're going to be doing instead is typing out the actual string that we want to use. So respectfully, comma, and then we can use press and release for the enter key in order to get the line break. And then after that, we can use C type again And then I'm just going to put my name in here, Christian Kessler. Oh, leave that single quote in there. And at the end of it all, we'll have a little print statement that says function completed. Now, the print is going to go to the terminal, not to the text application that we're looking at in the foreground. So let's save this. We can delete it, and we will restart the Python script, run Python file. Looks like there aren't any compilation errors or anything crazy like that. Let's delete all this, and we're going to try 0EF and see what happens. Sweet. So we used 0EF, and it deleted those characters. It released the keys before I did, and then it typed out all of the stuff that we just told it to. So now you may have noticed that it happened almost instantly, and that's not ideal sometimes. Sometimes, you know, some applications don't really like super fast input like that, especially on browsers and stuff, but most of the time you're going to be okay, but I like to be extra careful. So now we're going to go in here and add little pauses. So we can say, hey, between these particular lines of code, pause, you know, half a second, quarter of a second, tenth of a second, something like that, so we can actually watch it happen as we go. And that's going to be using this time module up here that we installed at the very beginning. So what I'm going to be doing here is a little bit obnoxious, but it will it'll show you what I'm talking about here. So the way that we use the time module is going to be time.sleep, and then we type in an integer. So I'm going to give a 1 second delay between every single one of these lines of code, except the keystrokes press and releases, or the backspace press and releases, because otherwise it might like it might consider that a held down backspace, and then that will, you know, delete like everything behind it. So we're going to go ahead and time sleep 1, time sleep 1, time sleep 1, and we'll leave that there. Cool. So now there's going to be a 1 second pause between all of those. So let's see how long this file takes to run. It's not going to be all that expedient, but at least you'll know how to use it, and you can start to see what I mean by this. So we'll go and run the Python file. We'll head on back here, Control A, delete all, and we're going to do 0EF. So there's a backspace, there's another one, it's all a second later, respectfully. Alright, so you may have noticed each one of those gaps was about a second. There was kind of a pause at the beginning there because it took a second to release each of the keys one by one. But you can see that it actually paused, took some time, the function was delayed. Now you might be wondering why you'd want to delay a function like this when you could just type it out instantly. And you know, a 1 second gap in here is pretty annoying, so we can get rid of a lot of these. Now, most of the time you don't want big delays in your programs. You want them to be faster than if you were to type it out manually. So you can do little things like maybe a 0.1, but you really don't need to do that between the backspaces. Now, the reason that these pauses are helpful is because sometimes you want to do things that take a moment or two to load, right? So there's some files that I like to run, and functions that I like to execute, and applications that I like to pull up that maybe take 4 to 8 seconds to load. One of my functions actually will automatically go to a given URL and press the tab button and then press enter to shuffle play one of my favorite YouTube playlists. But it takes a minute or two for that browser page to load up, and if I try to execute that tab enter instantly, it'll reach the end of the file long before the browser's done loading. So just a little tenth of a second is going to be more than enough to get rid of some weird errors and also make it significantly faster than if you were to type it out by hand. So let's remove all those annoying nonsense pauses and run it the way that it's supposed to be ran. So we'll delete it, 0EF. Now, it wasn't instant, but it was really fast. You know, that makes a big difference for a computer. As fast as a computer can go versus a tenth of a second between each of the lines seems pretty close to us as humans, but it makes a big difference to computers. And so I recommend adding those little breaks in there. It's not really going to impact your total efficiency on a day-to-day basis. I mean, if you have something that's doing 1,000 iterations, then shaving off a tenth of a second each time is going to end up saving you a lot. But for something like this, it's going to be more than adequate, I would say. Now there is one more thing you're going to need to do in order to get this ready to go for daily use. I'm just going to clean up a few of these things in here and make it say stuff that actually makes sense, like keystrokes, file, ready for execution. And then we're going to do email footer function called and email footer function completed. We're just going to save it, just a few little, quality of life descriptive text inclusions. And now the other thing we want to do in order to make this ready to use after our quality of life changes is to set up a shortcut. We don't want to go into Visual Studio Code or the command line or have to find this thing in the File Explorer every single time we want to use it. So we're going to go ahead and right click, open in File Explorer, select the file, and we want to create a shortcut. So we can cut the shortcut, head over to the desktop, paste it there, and we need to go over to Visual Studio Code and make sure that we've got rid of this terminal so it's not still running it. And we can minimize everything. Now we have a little shortcut to our Keystrokes Python file. When we double click it, it's going to know that it's a Python file that needs to be executed as such. So let's open up Notepad just to show that it's working. Keystrokes file ready for execution, 0EF, respectfully Christian Kessler. Email footer function called, email footer function completed. So now that it's right on the desktop, it's ready for you, it's not going to harm your CPU, and you can go ahead and modify it to whatever you need it to be. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you'd like me to expand on it and show you some of the other cool things that my Python Keystrokes files can do, feel free to let me know in the comments below, and thank you for watching.